Good morning and welcome to Sunday Coffee, Art, Design, and Architecture. And a happy Sunday morning. This show is coming to you from Florida on a gorgeous Sunday morning overlooking the gentle lapping waves on the Gulf of Mexico. My motivation for this podcast channel is to broadcast good news stories, interesting people, and food for thought. So pour yourself a nice hot cup of tea or coffee, take a deep breath, get cozy, and enjoy a break for some uplifting conversations. And today's book is The Blue Revolution: Hunting, Harvesting, and Farming Seafood in the Information Age by Nicholas Sullivan, published by Island Press in 2022. Mr. Sullivan is a senior fellow at the Fletcher School of Counsel on Emerging Market Enterprises and a senior research fellow at its Maritime Studies program. He has been twice named a fellow to the Rockefeller Foundation Bellagio Center. He is a graduate of Harvard and the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. He currently resides in Dartmouth, Massachusetts. So, hi, Nick. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you.
So, I guess you're on the coast up there while I'm on the coast down here.
Yep, I live right on Buzzards Bay, which is southeastern Massachusetts, looking across to the islands and Martha's Vineyard in the distance.
Oh, that sounds beautiful.
Yeah, it's a nice body of water, good sailing, good fishing.
Well, I can already see why you probably wrote this book.
Well, there were a couple of reasons, and one is we also live about 20 minutes from New Bedford, which is the top value fishing port in the U.S., and so I've been following the ups and downs, the vicissitudes of commercial fishing for some time now. So that was definitely a part of it. But also I had started back in the 70s, when I was in college, writing about commercial fishing, in particular the fishermen on Cape Cod and in New Bedford, who were trying to fight off foreign factory ships off the shore of Cape Cod and Massachusetts and New England in general. That was when there was a 12-mile federal limit, which is now 200 miles. But you could see from the shores of Cape Cod these huge factory ships that were just scooping up all kinds of fish. And the little day boats going out of Cape Cod were kind of overwhelmed. So anyway, I got back into fishing initially through that framework lens, as it were.
Well, this is a good podcast to kind of introduce my audience to fishing. They may or may not have the background in it. Mine's in landscape architecture, but I thought this was really interesting because it's so integral to our coastlines and our diet. I also always start with, what was your motivation for writing this particular book?
Well, I was actually trying to answer a question because, I had heard, as you've probably heard, as your listeners have probably heard, over the last couple of decades, all these dire stories about fish stock depletion, overfishing, the end of fish, and so forth. So I was really trying to answer that question. And I started out with a global perspective, which, of course, immediately became too massive, especially during the pandemic. So I kind of shrunk it down to New England, where I'm from, which is a much more manageable subject area. It's also one of the nation's historic fishing industries. So the initial thing was to figure out where the fish are going to come from to feed the world, which is, growing rapidly, and more people are eating more fish. But then as I did it, as I got into it, I realized that there are very negative perceptions about fishing, both wild capture fishing and farm fishing. So part of what I was trying to do is kind of rewrite that narrative, because a lot of things have changed over the last 20 years. And I think a lot of the negative perceptions date to the 1990s.
Well, I know this is kind of a basic question for you. I'd like to know, and maybe my audience too, is what is the difference now between wild-caught fish and farm fishing? There's a lot in the news about, is it nutritious? Is it not? The pros and cons. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, I can try. I mean, farm fish now, so the basic answer to where are the fish going to come from to feed the world is from farm fish, because the amount of wild fish that are being caught has been flat for about 30 years, no increase. Meanwhile, the farm fish have increased, and it's now more than half the fish eaten in the world are farmed, like 52%, I believe. I don't know what the actual figure in the U.S. is. A lot of what the U.S. eats in fish is farmed shrimp and salmon from the other side of the world. So in terms of the difference in the fish, I mean, I think a lot of that is, up to the individual. Some people like farm fish, some people don't like the idea of it. Some people like the taste of wild. I think it just varies. But I think, in terms of nutrition and protein and so forth, they're pretty similar. I don't think there's really much difference between them.
Well, before we get too far in the book, I will say my degree's in art. So for the art people out there, you made a point to put fish prints in your chapter covers.
Right. Yeah, I know. It's an old. These prints are made. There's a woman, Stephanie Mason, in Gloucester, Mass, an old and revered seaport, fishing port in New England. They are made by taking a dead fish, painting it, and then transferring that onto a paper to make a print. It's an old Japanese technique which was designed to measure the size of different species over time. So you get a real physical print of the actual size of the fish at a given point in time. But they're quite beautiful. She does them in color, but of course I have them black and white in the book. So each chapter opens with it's called Gaya Toku is the technique, fish print.
Oh, so you really have quite a historical, that was kind of going to my next question too, is quite a historical documentation of fish species from around the world then.
Yes. Well, the ones that we've got in the book, her fish are mostly from New England because that's where she lives. And of course, that's what I'm writing about. So basically all the fish all the prints in this book are kind of native to New England or the northeast coast of the U.S.
Okay, so take me back. So I remember in your book you said that fishing historically has been like one of the original industries here in the United States. Can you tell me a little bit more about how it started in New England, the historical context of fishing? How did it play into maybe American history too?
Well, if you go back to the original days of the early settlers and the Mayflower in Plymouth, they were fishing. In Gloucester, which was city charter, was in 1642, and fishing of cod, or as an economic staple, was written into the city charter. So that's early 1600s and the Northeast coast. But of course, fishing had been, the Basques from Spain had been fishing over in the Gulf of Maine and George's Bank and the Grand Banks up around Newfoundland since 1000 A.D. And they kept it a secret from the rest of the world for quite a while because it was and still is kind of a hallowed fishing ground. So anyway, it definitely dates back to those, 1,000 plus years, and from the U.S. it dates back to the 1600s. Yeah, so it was definitely the first industry, along with I suppose you could say timber, maybe, and then later some of the textile and sawmills and so forth. But yes, it's an ancient industry and part of the fabric of much of New England in terms of the coastal towns and the working waterfront communities.
Well, it's true. I'm here close to Destin, Florida. Yeah, it's marketed as the little fishing village. So something quaint and cute. So that's definitely played into the folklore and narrative of many coastal towns.
Yes, and it's great to keep them going because I think one of the fears is that they turn in condos and taffy shops and tourist shops and so forth, rather than working waterfronts. So there is a big movement, as I'm sure you know from where you are, just to kind of keep that kind of old culture and social fabric together. It's worth fighting for, I think.
That's what we all still like to eat our fish. We like fresh seafood.
That's right.
Now, this one kind of caught my eye. You told a story about Carlos Rafael. He was this is too funny, the cod father. And it kind of plays into the state of the fish industry today. Can you tell us more about who he is and what he did?
Right. Carlos is a Portuguese immigrant, became very successful, one of the biggest boat owners on the East Coast, fishing boat owners. I think he had 47 at one point. Ground fishing like cod and haddock, but also scallopers and crabbers, there's all kinds of fishing boats. And he was indicted in 2016 for falsifying his catch, for basically for catching cod, which was kind of shut down for rebuilding, and calling it haddock or some other plentiful species, and also for selling it direct through his own processors without recording it and reporting it to the IRS. So he was mislabeling the fish and he was not reporting the income. He was indicted and spent 4 years in jail. He's out now. And it's been a big wake-up call for the industry, I think, because there has always been this kind of secretive, non-transparent aspect to fishing, partly because fishermen always like to keep secrets about where the fish are. But, in a time when people are really trying to monitor the fish catch and to regulate it and so forth, to have this kind of off the books, non-transparent character really opened up a lot of eyes. And I think it actually has been one of the things that is really shifting the whole industry into a new kind of post-industrial age, more concern for the habitat, the stock, the long-term sustainability, and so forth. I mean, it's not the only thing, of course, but, at least in this region in New England, he was such a big character that to have him go through this in due time, and basically, they tied up all his boats when he was in jail. It really was a huge hit to the industry in terms of GDP. I mean, the city of New Bedford was losing $500,000 a day because the boats were not working, the supply chain was not working, and so forth. So it's he's a colorful figure. He's very successful. He made a lot of money when he was in jail. He sold his boats for $70 million. He's been enjoined from ever fishing again. There are lots of colorful figures in the industry, and he's certainly not the only person who is behaving like that.
Yes, it reminded me of being in the Florida Keys when I was living down there, and the boats, and it was like a game. The Coast Guard's after people and they're trying to fish, and it's to be almost like a little cat and mouse game on the water.
Right. Well, the fishermen have been, I say several times in this book that the last 20 years have been better for the fish than for the fishermen, because there have been so many regulations, severe restrictions on where and when and what you can catch and how much, and the monitoring by the federal regulators and the environmental police, and fishermen kind of bridle about all these restrictions, and they've lost boats because of the catch quotas have been reduced. But it's been good for the fish. I mean, since 2000, 47 fish stocks that were overfished and basically shut down have been rebuilt. That is, they've been opened up again, and they're now being fished at a sustainable level. So it's been a rough couple of decades for the fishermen, but good for the fish, good for the habitat, for the ecosystem, and so forth. And that is really true of the U.S. as a whole, that it's got a very good reputation for, it's a global leader in fisheries management, which, most people I don't think really appreciate, because they really think that everyone's just overfishing and corrupt and so forth. But that's not the case necessarily.
Well, that's a good lead into my next question, is what is the real state of the fish industry, and is it sustainable here in the United States? Are they doing fish surveys, or how are the stocks doing?
Well, I think pretty well. Like I say, this is for the U.S. as a whole. In the last 20 years, 47 stocks that had been shut down or from fishing have been reopened because they were rebuilt. So now there are, I think, another 45 stocks that are quote unquote overfished and closed for rebuilding. And typically what has happened around the world with fish stocks is that they will rebuild in about a 10-year period if they are left alone and given the time and to come back, which is really pretty encouraging. So that has really been increasing in the United States. The rebuilding has been increasing. The overfishing has been reduced. There was a law passed in 2007 that took effect in 2010, which is to put annual catch limits on every stock of fish. And you asked about the surveys, and of course, they're doing annual surveys, and not every stock every year, but the big ones, annual surveys. And then they estimate the amount that can be sustainably caught, the maximum sustainable yield, which is a kind of basic bedrock principle of U.S. fisheries policy. If it can be regulated and the scientists get the number right, which is not always the case, you can manage a sustainable fishery, and you can keep it sustainable as long as you keep the measurements up and keep the regulation up and so forth. But obviously, it's a tricky thing to do.
Well, yeah, and that's a good lead in. My next question here. So the book you're talking about how smart technologies can allow for sustainable fish catch. How are they using smart technologies to adapt to sustainable practices?
Well, one thing is in the surveying, they're using underwater cameras and sensors and machine learning algorithms to kind of estimate the number of fish that are going through a net or a certain body of water. They recently started putting they used to have, or they still do have in some cases, onboard human observers checking out what people are hauling on board and throwing overboard. Now they're converting that to electronic monitoring, so they can see it from the shore, and that information is being collected by the regulators, and so they have a much more precise way of measuring what's happening to the fish on board. Then, of course, in the surveying, there's regular surveys, and they're comparing that to the landings and the statistics. So there's just a lot of modeling that is going into this idea of estimating, the sustainable yield. So what they would do is they say, if a given stock, say, has a million metric tons, they'll take 75% of that and say, just to make, for possible error, so that's 750,000 tons. And then they say, well, we'll only catch 20 to 40% of that 750. So you're fishing really well below the sustainable yield. And that's what, ideally keeps it sustainable for the long term. And if you get those numbers right. But it's a hard thing to do, obviously, to measure fish swimming around in the ocean.
How do they survey fish under the water? I was a dolphin trainer long time ago, and it's not easy to do science. We don't give them enough credit for it. So how in the world do they even attempt to do these fish surveys?
Well, the basic one that NOAA does on a regular basis is they trawl or dredge, depending on what they're looking for, and they haul up the fish on board, and they count them, and they weigh them, and they measure them, and they get a sense of young versus old, male versus female, biomass, the weight, the heft, and it's all kind of, they've been doing this for so many years, it's comparable to years past. And now they're starting to look more even at larvae and trying to project and model the future population. So, they have made mistakes. And in some cases, especially with the cod, they kept there were several times where their surveys turned out a few years later to be dead wrong. It's either because they thought that the young fish would survive to adulthood and they didn't, or they just happened to randomly over-survey a spot where there was a lot of fish and miss the spots, that were empty. You obviously can't survey the entire ocean, right? So they tend to survey the same spots over and over and over again. And of course, fish migrate, so they don't always stay in the same spot.
Well, how then is climate change affecting these fish stocks? And yeah, I can see how you might pick an area and then it's like, oh, we really didn't pick the right spot.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a lot of movement now with the fish stocks. They used to be up in New England, northern shrimp, which was a winter crop, nice little tiny shrimp, very tasty. They're gone. They moved north. The northern shrimp moved north. Lobsters are moving north because of the warming water. So there are two impacts. The one is warming water from climate change, and the other is acidification, the CO2 absorption in the water. The CO2 is less well studied, but it basically affects shell building. It affects the calcium carbonate of shells, breaks it down. And so it's mollusks need to put more energy into shell building than they do into growing their meats. But the warming water has all kinds of affects it. The fish are moving toward colder water or deeper water. There's less warmer water holds less oxygen, so the fish are stressed, so they're getting smaller. Large fish in particular have less gill area per volume than smaller fish, so the big fish are getting smaller. The phytoplankton, the little microscopic algae that's at the bottom of the food chain, has less energy because there are less nutrients upwelling from the bottom. The little fish, the forage fish, the herring, and so forth, are getting less energy, and so it's kind of there's all kinds of impacts that are kind of working in tandem or at cross currents with one another to affect fish behavior and growth.
Well, what about it's a little, I'm sure this is in your book, plastics with fish, because when I was doing the dolphin training shows, we were talking about plastics 30 years ago. How is that affecting fish stocks, the fishing industry?
Well, this is something that I did not cover, and I know it's on the minds of a lot of people because people ask me about it, but I did not get into it because I had enough on my plate with the climate change and the overfishing issue. So I don't really know. I mean, I know that people are really worried about the microplastics. In New Bedford, there's a great whaling museum because it used to be a great whaling port, and periodically they have images of whales that have been caught with not microplastics, but large pieces of plastic in their stomachs. So I don't know what it is really doing to fish populations, whether there's toxicity in the plastic, or I'm just not the person to ask about that. I'm sorry to say.
Oh, that's okay. We're about fishing in general. Let me ask you, there was another chapter in here, and I didn't realize that kelp was used for food, fuel, and the pharmaceutical industry. Can you talk about that?
Right. Well, so many civilizations have eaten kelp for centuries. The U.S. has not done that, but in Asia and even ancient 1,000 or 2,000 years ago in South America, there are, evidence of kelp diet. So it's now become a big, some people call it a darling of the blue-green economy because kelp, it grows off horizontal ropes in the water, and it grows straight down. It absorbs CO2, which it takes the, acidification, reduces the acidification in localized areas. It's always been big in Asia, obviously in Japan, for kelp, been big in China, just as food. Now the Department of Energy in the U.S. is really experimenting with growing large, massive kelp farms offshore to use as a biofuel to convert into fuel. And there are all these kind of projections, both for food and for fuel, that if you took something like the size of Washington State and turned it into a kelp farm, feed half the world, you could fuel, a third of the U.S. and it has incredible, and a lot of these kind of theoretical models are probably a little far-fetched and unrealistic. It's certainly interesting and positive. And the other thing is when you grow kelp with, say, like shellfish, like oysters or mussels, because it absorbs the CO2, it allows the shellfish to develop stronger shells and thicker meats. It has all kinds of great attributes. And, they mentioned the pharmaceuticals. I mean, some of it is creams and oils and so forth, but others is just actual serious anti-reflux medicines, anti-this. I mean, it's got all, they're doing tons of experiments now in converting kelp into pharmaceuticals.
I didn't know that. Now, okay, this is a bit of an amateur question, but I have always wanted to ask this of a fisherman. I'm assuming you like to go out fishing a lot, right?
Yes, I do like to go fishing, yes.
Okay, so I was wondering, because I've heard fishermen even in this area talk about regulations, etc. And I fished when I was a little kid. We go out and go fishing. So if you catch a fish and it's not long enough or big enough, and I'm required to toss it back into water, have I injured the fish to the point that it's probably not going to make it, even if I throw it back into water? How is that? I've always been curious, how does that work with that practice? Because I know you want them to be big enough, but am I injuring fish by even catching them in the first place before I throw them back into water?
No, I think by and large, no. But you bring up an interesting point because, if you were a commercial fisher and you were hauling up, say you're targeting haddock, which is very plentiful, and you pulled up cod, which there are restrictions on, and you wanted to throw the cod back overboard, it would be considered bycatch because you weren't targeting it. A lot of those fish do not survive because, depending on how long they're out of water. I mean, I think that's the main issue is how long are they out of water and what, and gasping for air is the real issue. And if you're in a small boat by yourself, you just unhook it and throw it back. I don't think there's much harm
done to the fish.
Yeah.
And this probably sounds like a real amateur question, but would it be better than to just whatever I catch, just weigh it by the weight of the total catch to keep? Or is it like I have to be careful about which fish I catch? Why would that be a difference or important in the fish stock numbers?
This was not really addressed by U.S. fisheries until 1996 when they rewrote the original, law to protect against bycatch, because they realized that U.S. fishing law basically was designed to protect single species. They had a maximum sustainable yield per species, right? You could catch this amount of that kind of fish. But they realized that in the process of doing that, you were catching a lot of other fish, the bycatch that you didn't want, and throwing it back, and a lot of it didn't survive. And so it's important to measure the amount of fish that you're catching because it's all part of the same ecosystem. Other fish are eating those fish. So they're putting strict catch limits on all kinds of stocks, even if they're not the favored ones that you're targeting. I don't know if that answers your question or not, or do you want to rephrase it?
No, that's okay. Yeah, I understand. I just have to say, I'm a little bit of an amateur fisher person here, and it's been a while since I've done that. But I've kind of, was thinking about me as a consumer and how does what I buy in a store affect the commercial industry or et cetera? How can consumers play a role in this sustainability for fish? Because we like fish, we want to keep it rolling. How do we do it?
That is a great question, and it's something that I really, as I was working on this book, became convinced is really a huge piece of the equation going forward, because it's very hard to tell where most fish comes from, right? It's not very well labeled. Up to 30% of fish that are sold in supermarkets or fish shops is mislabeled anyway, either intentionally or accidentally. So, in fish that is imported, all it has to say is the country of origin. It doesn't say, there's no requirement about, if it was farmed, how it was farmed, is it antibiotic free or not? So it's a difficult question. So I think that, there are two things. There's some MSC, Marine Stewardship Council certified fish, wild fish, and there's the Aquaculture Certified Council, ASC, certification for farm fish. And those are broad certifications for fisheries that say these fish are well farmed, sustainably caught, and so forth. And more so now there are QR codes on packaging. I mean, some like Whole Foods will not take anything that has not gone through a whole blockchain vetting process. I think most tuna, bumblebee tuna, all their tuna and all their supermarkets is now kind of blockchain certified through the supply chain. So there are, and it is kind of one of the hot things in the industry today is figuring out this traceability, given that the U.S. imports so much fish. I mean, we have a $17 billion trade deficit because we import so much more than we export. And a lot of the fish that we are importing is, kind of quote unquote illegally caught. There's a big, World Trade Organization, UN push, a U.S. Department of Commerce push, from all sides are kind of pushing on traceability, transparency in fishing.
There is a local seafood restaurant in Destin. I'll give him a shout out. It's Harbor Docks, a little free advertising. But he does advertise that he goes down to the docks and gets his fish right straight from the fishermen. And I didn't realize that maybe just growing up in Florida, I just assumed that they all did it because they all kind of say fresh seafood. But yeah, I found out that a lot of the restaurants around don't necessarily just get their fish off the docks around here. You just really don't know where your fish is coming from.
Yeah, no, it's a big problem. And I mean, as a consumer, it would really be good to favor, your local fishermen, your local providers. And yeah, so if you know that fish is coming from them, you have a sense of its sustainability. It's probably being caught according to the regulations. The fish that's coming from overseas, you don't know so much. And, most of what Americans eat from overseas is farmed shrimp, farmed salmon, and canned tuna. Like I say, the tuna is getting better. They really are following the supply chain there. Farmed shrimp and salmon, not so much. You don't really know conditions under which they were farmed and so forth.
So when I go to Publix or Whole Foods and they have fish labeled, they may or may not know from the supermarket. They may be just trusting other suppliers. But how do I know it's labeled right, or I just don't?
I don't think you do, really. I mean, I think in Whole Foods, you probably would assume that there's a good chance, a very good chance that it is labeled properly because they've got, boat to plate kind of blockchain traceability mandate. And I think more supermarkets are doing that. McDonald's, if you get a fish sandwich, that comes from some Alaskan pollock, probably by and large. And that's an MSC certified stock that's well managed. And so I think large institutional buyers, more universities and public schools are going this route. They're really kind of very choosy about what they're buying, and they want to know where it's coming from. There's also this other movement, the local catch movement, which is kind of like farmers markets in the agricultural space. That is a very positive development in kind of connecting consumers to fish and local fishers. So there are a lot of pressure points, I think, on the industry. But to your question of what does a consumer do, it's pretty hard to figure out. I mean, I live in, outside New Bedford, which is the top value port in the U.S., and you buy cod, you have no idea where it's from. It's probably from Iceland, actually, even though New Bedford used to be a huge cod. It flies into Boston in 4 hours, and there it is. But that's a sustainable fish. I mean, Iceland is a great fishery. It's a very well-managed fishery.
Oh, they do? Well, I was living in Key Largo and I would take a day trip down to Key West, and I was surprised to hear from people down there saying, no, ours is really like the local catch, but others it's not. And I think I guess as a consumer, you just have to try to talk to as many people as you can and kind of figure out who's using fresh fish and who's using imported fish. But I guess if it's from Iceland and et cetera, then that's a sustainable fish too. So you just don't know.
Right. Yeah. And, there's with, today's flash freezing techniques, it's probably, caught, processed quickly, flash frozen, and shipped. It's probably, a really kind of prime cut of fish. And that's actually, they are so efficient, it makes it hard for U.S. fishermen to compete with that. I mean, they've got better, more advanced processing plants, kind of they're going into robotics now. And so, yeah, the U.S. has got a lot of work to do if it's going to, reduce its $17 billion seafood trade deficit, which it really wants to do. It's a point that the Commerce Department has been harping on for 10 years now.
And I was surprised to hear that in your book, read that we import much more fish than we export. Do we just like fish more here in the United States, or what about the rest of the world? They just have a surplus?
Well, yeah, it's a tough thing to figure out. I mean, like I said, the demand for farmed or shrimp and salmon is intense in this country, and it's mostly restaurants. Most of that is farmed on the other side of the world. A lot of the U.S. fish that is exported, some of it is high value, like lobster and scallops exported. Some of it is squid that is exported for processing overseas and then comes back. Some of the Alaskan pollock is shipped to Asia for processing and then comes back. Fish travels, thousands of miles, some fish, before it lands on a plate. But, the net is that the U.S. is importing, I think we import $22 billion worth of fish and export about $5 billion. Yeah, some people would say it's a national security issue, but I don't think too many would say that.
Well, maybe you think there's in the Keys in Key Largo, there's a couple people that have the Cook Your Catch restaurant. So
nice. Yeah.
I guess it's if you really want to know, you just go out in the boat and just catch your fish.
Right. And of course, you always, when, growing up in Florida or Massachusetts, you tend to have a kind of a little bit of a warped perspective on the whole thing because you're much closer to the ocean and to, fishing ports as opposed to interior U.S. or Canada or anywhere. Right. And that's a lot of the imports are going, probably, I would say,
Well, that's true. I worked a lot in the tourist industry here, and the perception is, I guess, yeah, growing up here, it is a little bit of a microcosm. I just think, yeah, you can just go catch your fish or go get it off the docks or whatnot. But a lot of tourists have come down, and they were so excited because they to come to the restaurants. You're like, oh, we could get fresh seafood now instead of the frozen seafood back home. But it might not be.
Right. Yeah, well, there's there's this other thing now. We talk about the local catch and the local markets, like farmers markets, but increasingly, one thing you can do with fish that you can't do with vegetables is freeze them and ship them. So there's a local catch company in Alaska called Sitka Salmon Shares, which is freezing fish and shipping it all over the U.S. and probably other parts of the world. And that's a really good fresh fish caught in Alaska, flash frozen fast, and then shipped. It's not going to feed the world because it's not that cheap, but it is a domestic fish, and it sustainably caught, so that's good.
Let me ask you, what was your favorite part about writing this book and doing this research?
Well, one thing that I like visiting fish farms and fish people, but I didn't do as much of it as I wanted to because I wrote it basically during the pandemic lock. I missed on a lot of that. My favorite part was really just trying to figure out a very complex industry that people have kind of knee-jerk reactions to it or perceptions of it. Then I said, whoa, it's amazing how complicated it is. There are so many species, there are so many regulations, there are so many different ways to distribute fish. It goes through so many hands. How do you track it? And so I was just trying to figure it out. Was really interesting.
Yeah, I didn't, and maybe it's my bias growing up here in Florida too, going fishing, getting to fish, the local seafood restaurants out there on the harbor. But it really is quite complex thinking about the fish surveys and trying to figure out how to fish, overfish, and how to keep the regulations and how to enforce the regulations.
Yeah, well, the other one way to think about it is so NOAA Fisheries, which oversees, it's the main federal regulator, oversees 450 stocks, different species of fish, and you compare that to say beef, pork, chicken, and lamb in meats, and obviously there are different types of beef and so forth, but there's a lot more going on in the fishery world than there is in land-based animal world.
Yeah, there's only so many vegetables.
Right. Well, I wasn't even talking about vegetables. I was talking about meat, protein meat.
That's right. True. There's just a few species of cow. I could be wrong.
Right.
Somebody might email me and say there's more than that, but yeah, that's true, but not 450. I don't believe.
No. So yeah, so I don't know if that was fun to figure out, but it certainly was intriguing and interesting, and it gave me a lot more, respect for the problems people are facing, and it's a very contentious issue, regulating fishing. The fishermen don't want to be regulated. They've been, for decades, they've been fishing anywhere they want to their heart's content. That world is all changing now, and the regulators are in a hard spot too. But one thing, here's another interesting thing. It's really not the federal regulators that are doing this, because the original fishing law in 1976, the Magnuson-Stevens Act, set up 8 fishery management councils in different parts of the U.S. So there's a New England, there's a Mid-Atlantic, there's a Gulf of Mexico, there's a Caribbean, there's a et cetera. They're made up of fishermen, politicians, state regulators, citizens group, environmental groups, and each fishery council has one NOAA representative. So they're very much like kind of old town meeting, and they're the ones that established the annual catch limits. They're the ones that established the regulations. So it's not a federal top-down thing. It's a kind of grassroots citizen town meeting type process.
So everybody can have their say.
Everyone can have their say. Yeah. And the final authority is vested in the Commerce Department and NOAA. But, the fishery management councils are really the driver
of the
of fish policy, fish management. Yeah.
That's funny. Fish policy. What do you do? What's your job? Fish policy.
Policy, right? That's good. That's bad. There's a Barton Seaver, who wrote a blurb for the back of my book, who's a kind of started out as a chef, then is now a seafood literacy advocate, a sustainable fish advocate. He says that seafood is the only protein considered guilty until proven innocent, which is, I think, a lot of the way people think about seafood. There's got to be something wrong with this fish until you prove that there's nothing wrong with it.
That's too funny, and it's kind of one of the oldest professions.
I know that. Yeah, that's correct. I don't know if it's always been that way, but that's the way it seems to be now. Interesting business.
Interesting, yes, and it answered some of my questions here in Florida. Well, Nick, it's been wonderful having you on the show this Sunday morning, and my cup of tea is now gone. I don't know. We forgot? Did you have a cup of tea or coffee at the beginning?
Tea, yes.
Oh, you're a tea drinker too.
Yeah. I'm both, but I have tea. Yeah.
You got tea this morning, huh?
Yeah, right.
Oh, I'm okay. Well, I'm a black tea. What kind of tea? I like to ask my guests what kind of tea.
I like black breakfast tea.
I'm going to take a survey of everybody and get our favorite beverages.
Milk and sugar in it, so that doesn't really count as black tea, I realize.
Oh, well, yeah, sure. So it's black tea with milk and sugar.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah.
Oh, that'll work. Yeah. Well, Nick, it's like I said, thank you so much for being here today. I know we've taken up a lot of your time. Can you tell the audience what exciting projects or books are you working on next?
Well, right now I am doing podcasts like yours. I'm trying to write spin-off articles from the book. I've got a bunch of talks lined up. So that's what I'm doing now. And, I hope that it's, going forward, there's a big push and a lot of, as we talked about at the beginning, a lot of coastal communities and seaport towns and fishing ports to develop a quote unquote blue economy to replace some of the fishing that has been lost. And New Bedford is one of those places. I can see trying to get involved in some of that to develop some, even fish-related but land-based businesses, entrepreneurial businesses that are related to fishing but not directly in the fishing business. Again, that would be an offshoot of what's happening in Iceland, where they're doing and they're finding that they're making more money from these related businesses than they do from the fishing business, but it's keeping the coastal economy alive.
Oh, so U.S., we've got a little catching up to do here.
Yes, that is correct. But but things are moving. Things are definitely changing. So I feel, you said you like good news stories. I do feel optimistic. I hope I'm not too optimistic. I hope I'm not a Pollyanna-ish observer, but I think things are really changing and changing fast. And this whole idea of the blue economy is part of it, because people are saying, wow, the ocean is an incredible resource. We've got to protect it, and we can make it part of our economy.
Well, I'm going to take this book and go drop it off at the free little libraries down the Destin docks for the fishermen down there.
Oh, good. Well, just tell them it's largely about New England, but hopefully it will apply to them as well.
I'm sure they can figure it out. Well, again, Nick, thank you so much for being here on the show today. And I want to let my audience know that the book is The Blue Revolution: Hunting, Harvesting, and Farming Seafood in the Information Age by Nicholas Sullivan, published by Island Press in 2022. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Tricia, and enjoy the fish in Florida. I hope to come down and enjoy it myself.
That sounds like a perfect plan. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.